taxes every year while balancing the books every year and reducing the debt of the province of New Brunswick. We made record investments in key priorities, healthcare and education. But we also had to make some choices. It wasn't always easy, but we made some choices to invest in the infrastructure of the future. Our strategy was based, and I believe this to be true today, on 4 basic pillars of economic success. 1, invest in people. 2, choose and embrace innovation. 3, create a business environment that is competitive. And 4, build strategic infrastructure. Just a few words on all of these. When we talk about investing in people, when you look around the world today and you look at what type of jobs will be around in the future, 80%, at least 80% of new jobs that will be created once we get through this economic crisis will require at least 2 years of post-secondary education. When you live in rural communities and remote communities, having access to broadband services, to have access to education is essential for future generations and our young people. And if it's essential for them, it's essential for all of us because that's how we guarantee the future of our communities. That means investing in education from the earliest of ages to support learning at an early age, and understanding that education never ends. It never stops. It's not once you're out of university you say, finally, I'm done learning. Learning must happen every day, every week, every month, every year. And we need to encourage this type of lifelong learning if we are to be successful in the new economy that is coming. This links to innovation. Innovation just means embracing constant evolution. There's not one magic bullet, you do one thing once and suddenly it's over. It means embracing new ways of doing things. And innovation should not be limited to having the newest BlackBerry, which I think is really cool and I'm happy to have one. And I encourage you all to buy a new cell phone. That's the pitch for the CWTA. But innovation should not be limited just to technical innovation. We have to innovate how we think. And I think that's part of the most important types of innovations that we need as communities, as provinces, as a country. And what I see here is you are embracing that type of innovation. To hold this type of summit shows that you have embraced innovation not only in the technology side, but you're thinking ahead and planning ahead. And that needs to be commended. And I believe that is critical to success. I believe that once you invest in education and you combine education with innovation, that leads to increased productivity. Increased productivity increases your competitiveness locally, nationally, internationally. And once you're more competitive, that increases your prosperity, and that's how we can fund the social programs that we want for our children, for our families, and our seniors. In New Brunswick, we launched a strategy of innovation called ENB that was based on more e-government, more services online, accessible wherever you are, on e-learning to make it easier for people to learn wherever they are, on healthcare as well, e-business, and of course, building the infrastructure we needed to support this type of environment. I've also always believed that you need the right fiscal environment to support growth and prosperity. That means having governments that are focused, governments that cut taxes when it's possible, but also having governments that live within their means. Now that's rare to find these days, but these are unusual circumstances. And I think people can accept some deficits for a short period of time. But we should not become complacent and go back to where we were in the 70s and the 80s and 90s, where deficits were prevalent every single year. It cripples and mortgages the future of our children. And that's why this component to future success is essential. Maybe sometimes we need deficits in the short term, but we have to make sure that we don't create structural deficits that our children will end up paying for all of us forever. In terms of strategic infrastructure, which is the key to your conversation here these 2 days, I believe it's essential. And as we embrace the new economy of the 21st century, I also believe that we need to embrace a new definition of infrastructure. that when we talk about having shovel-ready projects in infrastructure, it should not be limited to roads and bridges. Yes, of course we need roads and bridges, and we need ports and airports, and we need electricity, and we need power and energy, absolutely. But we also need the 21st century infrastructure that allows ideas to move faster, concepts to move faster, innovation to happen faster, that enables people to communicate without having to move, therefore being greener technologies and greener infrastructure. And that's where the 21st century infrastructure is so important. Having access to high-speed broadband services wherever you are, whether it's at home, at work, or in between, is part of that 21st century infrastructure. And that's why, again, I want to repeat myself because this is key to the message. What you are doing is so important. And I know you'll face some obstacles and you'll wonder, will you get there? I believe that you can. I believe that you will. I believe that you must. And all of us, we must throughout the country. 21st century infrastructure, just like other types of infrastructure, sometimes needs a little bit of support from the government because it's part of the public good. It's part of the public interest. We have built roads in our country, not always with tolls, usually without tolls, because it's the public good. We've helped communities have access to electricity in the past, not just based on a pure economic model, because it was needed to reach those communities. And I believe some of those public good, public interest principles apply to 21st century infrastructure in making sure that our communities are connected and can have access to high-speed broadband. And that's why I have to say I was pleased with the recent federal budget that announced $225 million to extend broadband coverage in Canada. I will also say I would have loved to see more. But $225 million is a good investment. While the government has not yet defined exactly how they will invest this $225 million, we've had some conversations and some dialogue with the government since they announced the investment. And what they've indicated so far is they'll probably follow, and I emphasize the word probably, follow 5 basic criteria to determine. 1, speed of the proposed service. Of course, this is for high speed. 2 is how many homes will be passed, how many people will be reached by the additional services. 3, the price point has to be competitive as well. Scalability, in the sense, will the system be able to be upgraded in the future? And 5, sustainability. Will the providers that are signing on, will they be there for the long run and making sure once the investments are made that people actually get the services? Now this is what we have been told so far by Industry Canada. This is not coming from the CWTA. I'm just sharing this as a public announcement, information purposes to all of you. Also, I think, and they've indicated, that another element is the presence of funding or support from either provincial or local government would also be helpful. And I think it's a great way to leverage all that investment. All this to say that when we look at our future, and yes, we're lucky to live where we live, but there's still more work that needs to be done, and we should never become complacent. It's easy to become complacent, but we shouldn't. And sometimes we need a crisis to make sure that we don't become complacent, but we're facing that crisis now. In the wireless telecommunication community of Canada, we continue to invest and build the infrastructure that we need for the 21st century. We want to connect more Canadians to more services and affordable services than ever before. This will continue to improve quality of life, support competitiveness in business, help enhance public services, and certainly make our communities safer. Building more capacity, faster speeds, this is what we want to do. And to achieve this, we feel we don't need more regulations, more barriers, or certainly not more taxes. What we need are partners, innovators, and people that want to get the job done, people like yourself. Here are some quick facts that I will leave you with before I answer questions about the wireless industry in Canada. The Canadian wireless industry is adding approximately 1.5 million new subscribers every single year. There are now close to 22 million Canadians with wireless cell phones in Canada. Canadians spend more than 400 minutes per month talking on their wireless phones. And please don't talk while you're driving, and certainly don't text while you're driving. Keep 2 hands on the wheels and 2 eyes on the road is our philosophy at the CWTA. Canadians send more than 77 77 million text messages a day. I think my daughter and my son account for 1 million of those text messages. Just 6 years ago, that number was about 500,000. So it went from 500,000 text messages just 5-6 years ago to 77 million text messages today. 6.5% of Canadian households now have only cell phones, no landlines. And there are more cell lines, if I can say it that way, or wireless lines, than wire lines in Canada today. More than half of the 911 calls made in Canada are made through wireless services, demonstrating how cell phones and cell phone coverage can make our communities safer. Canadians enjoy wireless prices lower than most other countries, and Canada is the second lowest per minute wireless revenue among G7 countries. This industry supports over 25,000 direct jobs in Canada. As you know, Canada is the second largest country in the world with very low population density, and yet close to 98% of Canadians have access to wireless services. Wireless networks cover more than 1.3 million square kilometers of the country, an area that is larger than the entire countries of Germany, UK, Italy, Finland combined. When you think 95% of our population lives on 15% of the landmass, 5% live on 85% of the landmass. And that's the challenge that we face. That's the challenge that you face. And that's why addressing these issues are essential to the future well-being of these communities. As you can see, regardless of the challenges that we face, I'm an optimist by nature. And I've always believed that regardless of the challenges we face, it's always possible to find a solution. And I know that right now you pick up the news, you pick up the newspaper, you listen, and you feel things are worse than they've ever been in some ways. You know, it's probably not the case. They just seem worse. But when I think of our ancestors, I think of the people that came to build this country, and I look at the obstacles that they had to overcome to be able to build the prosperous nation and peaceful nation that we have. The obstacles that we face fail in comparison. They may be large and they may be great, but they still pale in comparison to what our ancestors had to go through. And that's why I'm confident that with the right public policy, with the correct leadership, and adopting an attitude of change, education, and innovation, we can succeed, and we can make our communities more prosperous, more peaceful than they are today. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have on wireless, on hockey, on Darwin, on anything at all. Please feel free to, we can talk about politics if you want.
Thanks for a great speech and a little piece of trivia. I grew up in Moncton, so good on you.
Place to be.
Quick question. Our speaker this morning talked very much about governance and the importance of governance on community networks. We've been involved in a couple of these over the last 7 or 8 years, a combination of municipality, school, college, and private sector. And this is very difficult to do. Do you have 2 or 3 points you could make that would sort of crystallize principles that could guide shared governance when you've got the private and a mix of public sector involved?
I wish I had the simple solution, but I think obviously you need to negotiate those items to make sure that you can meet the needs of your community. And you have to assess the needs of the community first before you set the rules of governance to make sure that your system is adapted to maximize your needs. There is a limit. There's a limit to capacity, there's a limit to speed, and how you share the network to meet all the needs that you have. And the needs are growing. We talked about change. I believe there's more change coming in the next 20 years than we've seen in the last 20 years. In healthcare, in education, in communication, there's more change coming. So the demand for more capacity will be there. So having the right governance rules are essential. Unfortunately, I can't give you any specific advice. I'm glad I had lunch before because maybe you wouldn't serve it to me now. But, but I can't give you any specific advice on that. Yes.
Mr. Lord, could you take a minute to explain what I think is called white space, which is kind of the unused spectrum that could be available and provide a lot of broadband?
Yes. There is, and there's new spectrum that will be made available by the Government of Canada. There's some spectrum that is being